يا هلا يا هلا يا هلا يا هلا يا هلا.
Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome to Sister Speak. Today you're joined with me, Lamisa.
And me, Mariam.
And it has been a while since I have been on this show, and I have to say it is quite nice being back in the studio, although not the same studio, but it's nice being back here. It's nice being on radio and actually talking to people. So yeah, getting back into one of my hobbies. But alhamdulillah, we have a good show planned for today. Me and Mariam are going to be reflecting on this period of the 20s, what it means to us, what lessons we've learned so far, and kind of where we want the rest of this time period to go. So that's going to be our discussion today. But yeah, just to let you all know, this is a pre-recorded show, so we won't have any kind of live callers. But if you do want to get in contact with our show at any point to discuss any of the topics that we have discussed today, where can they get in contact, Mariam?
So they can message us at Sister Speak on Instagram, or they can message us on Facebook in Inspire FM. And we are also on TikTok as well. So if you want to engage in that way, we're happy to hear your thoughts.
I might have to check out our TikTok. I haven't actually looked at it yet, but I'm sure there's some really fun content on there as well. So yeah, please do get involved with our show and give us a follow if you can. Okay, so I guess we'll get into the first corner of our show. This is called Thought for the Week, and it's a part of the program where we discuss our thoughts for this week. And since Mariam is the only other person in the studio, I will go to Mariam first. So Mariam, what's your thought for the week?
I'm sure she's really enjoying that because I'm the one that's asking her. So my thought of the week, I think this week I've been really thinking about barakah, the concept of barakah, and how this concept transcends so many things. And I've been thinking about it in a way that barakah really multiplies things. So when you ask Allah to put barakah in your life, put blessings in your life, in a way you're asking Allah to increase you in that thing. And I was thinking about the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he asked Allah to bless Medina. And when you go to Medina, you feel a sense of tranquility. And I've been thinking about how it's something that I don't really ask for that much. I think I ask Allah to give me strength a lot, but I never ask Allah as much about barakah. And I feel like it's not something that's tangible, because I really was thinking about this concept. Like, it's not a tangible concept. It's not something that it doesn't fit in the realm of cause and effect. It's actually something beyond that. And I think that's quite beautiful as well. So I think I've been thinking about just how do I look at every aspect of my life and how do I ask Allah to put barakah in it. And in a way, I feel like indirectly that makes me think about my decisions and whether they're centric to Islam as well.
Some very important points there, especially with the process of decision making, things like that. I feel like maybe some of us confine our religion just to the practices that we do day to day, whether we prayed our salah or not, whether we've done our dhikr, things like that, kind of practical things that are very directly related to Islam, but we don't necessarily implement it in all aspects of our life, in the sense of, like you said, maybe through our decision making, and in a wider aspect of just how we live day to day and in our thoughts. And actually that is something that we should try more of, because Islam isn't just a religion of, doing specific actions to worship God, but rather emulating all of what God has said in all aspects of our life. So I think that's a very interesting thought for the week, and actually something we can all learn from. Me first and foremost.
So what's your thought of the week?
My thought of the week this week, I've been having a lot of complicated and quite messy thoughts, I'd say, over this past week. I feel like day to day I'm learning more and more how to think about things systematically. I think sometimes there can be times when you get quite overwhelmed with what's going on around you, whether that be the current situation that you're in, or whether that be with people, whether that be with kind of jobs and career progression and things like that. And at any one time, we're just so overstimulated with so many different things. I think it's important to be able to organize those thoughts in a manageable way. And so I feel like that's what I've been thinking about over the past week, how to kind of organize myself and kind of bring myself back to a point where I'm like, these are the things that I need to do, and now I can just do them, type of thing. And kind of taking some of the excess worry out of it. So that's kind of my thought for the week. And I feel like the way I've been dealing with it, I think sitting down, organizing yourself, writing things out is always a good way to declutter your head. For me, it always works, where you can write things down, write down your thoughts and get things out on a page. And then you can organize things in a way where it's, like I said, manageable for you to deal with. So yeah, that's what my thought for the week is.
Do you think, like, because you're transitioning from university to work, I think, is that process, how has that been for you? Because I imagine it's a completely new chapter, and there's expectation and the requirements is very different to what you are in university.
Yeah.
Although your sector is quite similar because you did do placements, but now you're contracted, and it's a very different kind of realm that you're going to be entering and navigating. So what has that experience been like?
I think another thing that's different, not just that we're contracted, but rather the responsibility that comes with it all. Because I feel like as a student, there's very little responsibility, and whilst you're learning the trade, in essence, it's not like you're there for patient care. Anything that you're doing is directly impacting patient care. Whereas when you're doing the job, there's a lot of responsibility. I feel like coming to terms with that, coming to terms with the fact that you now have to be there 9 to 5, all of these types of things, is a very big change. And I think partly that's probably why in the beginning I was feeling a little overwhelmed, because I was like, there's a lot of things going on at once. And also you're in a new environment, you're with new people, and obviously we'll touch upon this in the main topic of our show. It kind of links quite nicely on. But you transition and you meet new people, and it's a completely different environment and completely different to what you've known for so long. But I think with all things, it takes time to settle. And I think everyone feels that beginning kind of anxiousness that they have when they start a new job or start a new placement. It's always the same, and it always takes a bit of time to settle in, and then afterwards things kind of just fall into place. So yeah, I think it's more about riding the wave rather than getting swept underneath it.
That's a very nice allegory.
But yeah, I guess that very nicely sums up our thoughts for the week. Please do send in your thoughts for the week on Instagram. We'd love to hear your thoughts too. And I guess we will move on to, I would say, our hot topics. That's usually a part of the show where we discuss things that are going on in this moment in time. But I feel like, do you have a hot topic that you want to suggest?
So I think there's been an introduction to degree apprenticeships for medicine, and I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I think that's a very big question. I think it's a very new thing, and I think it's something that they are trying. I remember when I read up about it, I think it was a year ago or a couple years ago, when they were talking about introducing it, and I was like, this is an interesting concept. But I can't say that I've read too much into it now in terms of how it's actually played out. But what I will say is that I think it's good that they're trying to find ways to widen the access to medicine. I think that's something that definitely needed to be done. And I think a degree apprenticeship does make sense because the course is very vocational. But I guess my question would be is, in terms of traditional medicine, what are we doing if not an apprenticeship? Because we spend so many years on the ward learning, kind of in a very similar way. But I know that there's some differences between their course and our course, in the sense that with the degree apprenticeship, during holidays, they have to work in the NHS in a different role. So that's something that I've heard is a part of it. I will have to double check if that is correct or not. But there's things like that. And I guess it just kind of makes you think about which other ways could the policy have been done to make it slightly more effective in terms of widening access. Because also I think there's like a limit on who can apply. It's people who have had experience in the NHS from what I know so far. So it's not like open to anyone and everyone from what I know.
I think that's probably because it's a pilot.
Yeah, so which makes sense.
So for them to kind of ascertain whether this is something that's going to
they
be
can do or not
worthwhile. Yeah. But I do think it's a good step in the right direction.
I think so too.
Because I do think, obviously I'm not from the medicine field, but from just a outside perspective, it does seem like that's the right thing to do, to pay students because they're giving their time at placement.
Yeah, 100%. So this is what I mean, because obviously they're getting paid for their time, which 100% makes sense. And medicine is definitely more vocational, I would say, because it's a practice at the end of the day. But I also tend to ask the question, what were medical students doing all this time?
And I think that's what it is, right? That's the question they're trying to answer.
Yeah. So it might be where in the future we might see that actually medicine as a degree is an apprenticeship, and students do get paid for the work they do. It's interesting.
Because I think what it is if you award your students with finance and they don't have that worry of finance, the level of care and the quality of care, I would like to hope, would increase, because they're not strained. If a student is strained by financial constraints and they're worried about, it's a real thing. It's a reality that a lot of students may not afford to have consistent meals. It's another question whether they make themselves meals, but the poverty exists.
100%.
And I think, asking students to give all these hours at work and not being able to compensate that, I think it's very bad.
I think it comes on to wider questions about student welfare and student finances, and actually how we deal with, higher education as a whole. We know that people go to university and they come out with large amounts of debt, and it's a question for any government in power in terms of trying to prioritize the issues that students actually have. I did feel like, as a student, I really struggled in terms of finances, and yet it didn't seem like there was a lot of help. It seemed like there was talk about a lot of help, but when it came to the actualities of it all, it was really hard to get those extra finances that you needed. And so I feel like it's an issue that needs to be talked about more. I think we had a show about the cost of living crisis and actually how it was affecting students, and this was about a year ago, I think. And it was a really interesting discussion. But yeah, I do feel like students as a whole, not just medical students, but definitely medical students, we need help with finances, and especially those who are living in very expensive areas, for example, London, and those who are studying second degrees. Because that's a huge thing. If you go for a second degree, then the amount of funding that you're allowed to access is a lot lower. Which is crazy because, people might find out later on in life that they want to have a switching career and therefore they need a new degree for that, but they may not have the finances to be able to do so. I don't think it's fair to penalise people, with limiting their access to funds just because they didn't know what they wanted to do at an earlier stage. Yeah. Because I feel like we're forced to make these decisions very early on, 16, 17, especially for medicine as well. You tend to apply very early on. You have to build up all of the right requirements to try and get into medical school. And that means a lot of people end up making their decisions at like 14, 15. And then 24 by the time you graduate, and then you're kind of doing this whole career. And it's based on a decision you made when you were a child. I feel it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think people always say that you can pivot from different sectors, but I do think that
the actualities of it all.
The implication, the actualities, it's a lot more harder.
Yeah.
And, you really do have to start from the bottom. And I think any career you do, but I do think a decision that you made at 18, you shouldn't be held accountable at your age of 24. Yeah. And whilst there is more, there's more opportunities now, I do think that time is of the essence. And I think also people look at gaps in your CV and explaining that they would rather have someone that's, for example, if I wanted to get into economics and I wanted to work in a specific financial sector or institution, it's more likely they would hire the person that's done an economics degree, done a placement in economics, than someone like myself if I did an English literature degree and I now decided that I want to pivot. Yeah. So I think it's very difficult in terms of how people can navigate those issues. And I think that's why in America they do give you a variety of subjects that you can pick to allow a person to, specialize in one area. And I think that's quite good because it gives you an ability to make an informed decision.
100%.
But I do think here you kind of sign up for one. And I remember actually one of the first talks we had in university, and there was a lot of people dropping out in the first semester. Yeah. And the way this lecturer explained it, which I think back now, it was quite profound. She said that if you order a whole meal and they deliver it to you on your table, you can't send it back. That's it. You've committed to it. And so that's how they explain that when you commit to the degree, that's it. You've committed to it. So there was a threshold where you can, I think, drop out in the first 2-3 weeks. But beyond that, that's how she explained the concept. And I thought, it's not as simple as that. No. It's your whole life decision,
And that's just at a university level when people are considered, adults. But actually, if you think earlier on, it's a similar thing with I don't know how it was like at your school, but in our school, they were very much like, once you've made your decision for your subjects for GCSE or A level, you're not allowed to switch or you're not allowed to change. And it's like, I don't know how productive it is forcing us to stick to one thing. Obviously, I understand issues with funding and things like that. They obviously don't have an unlimited budget to give everyone the ability to study as many degrees as they want to. Otherwise, I'm sure there's some people out there who just love learning. Me being one of them, I would go from one to another. But I think, to be honest, it's a thing where you need to get the balance of giving people enough support to be able to pursue that changing career path if they want to have it. Because it's also too restrictive to expect someone to just be like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. And it's something that I'm finding in my career now, because you have to choose to specialize, right? But it's so difficult when each training pathway is almost like 10, 15 years that you have to commit to. And so it's kind of like weighing on my shoulders in terms of what do I want to do for the next 10 to 15 years. I now have to make that decision. Yeah, no, it's, of course, these are the types of things. But also I've been thinking, like, if there's something that I do and I feel like I don't like it, I should have the freedom and the ability and the courage to be able to be like, actually, I'm going to stop that and I'm going to go for something else. I feel like people rightfully so are worried about that switch. But it's something that we should enable ourselves to allow to do.
I think that's what it is as well. When, in terms of someone's committing 10 years of it, and by the second year they don't want to do it, that quality of care is going to be diminished, and that's really scary as well. As someone that uses the NHS a lot, you can see the lack of passion, or you can see that the duty of care is not there because their heart is not in it, and it really does reflect in care.
I really would hope that that's not the case, even if you're,
from my experience, just
because I want to say, even if your heart is not in something, I would hope that every single professional that is working in that entity would be doing what is required of their role. But now in the realities of it might be slightly different, but it's a shame.
So it's just like the risk you're taking on that, it's costly to the NHS, really and truly, because if someone is not adequately doing their job, then it's just more engagement with that institution, because they're not getting the adequate care, they're not getting sufficient means to get that care that they require. Whereas if someone is really invested in their job, and that's with all sectors, if you're really invested, you're going to have quality output. So yeah, I think it's difficult because every sector has, different discrepancies, and it's difficult. It's easy for us to kind of have this conversation and say all of these things, but I do think there should be some systematic way to kind of address that, because if people want to pivot, there should be scope. But I do understand in some areas it's not possible, because you really do require the speciality to do a certain thing. For example, maybe this is just me guessing, surgery. Like when you want to do surgeries, I'm sure there's a lot that has to go into that to kind of acquire the skills, because you're cutting people up. But I think like things that kind of smaller specialties, I feel like there should be that scope to move around as well.
I feel like with everything, if we're talking about medicine specifically, everything requires you need to show that you have the interest in that area. You need to prepare for it. So every single one takes a lot of time. But that, as with anything, if you apply to any job, they're going to expect you to know the field, they're going to expect you to know the role, they're going to expect you to have experience, things like that. So it's the same thing. And I feel like, as you said, it's going to be difficult for someone to go from one field to a completely different field.
What's really interesting is consulting is very different when it comes to this. So I did some consulting last year, and I worked on 5 different policy areas, and it's exactly what you described. I go to a completely new policy area. I'm expected to know the area in 2 weeks, from like a bird's eye view, ascertain it and then solve the problem. And that's what consulting is.
I was going to say, can you break down, because there's so many things about consulting where people are like, people don't know what consultants actually do. So break it down for us.
Yeah, so I think from my experience, I've already done it. I did consulting for 1 year. You're deployed in different projects, and they have different, and from my experience it was firefighting, so they have different problems, imminent problems, and your expertise is to solve those problems. So you have a set of skills that you can be deployed any kind of policy area. So how I did it was, I was deployed in a certain area, I found out the policy area, I found out who the key stakeholders were, and then I strategically make a plan, and then I deliver. And then 3 months ago, the problem solved, next problem. So it's always about problem solving. But how they recruit consultants is they have this baseline of skills. So they have people management, project management, strategic understanding, and then they use those skills and they go to these different areas.
That's really interesting. So you could be put onto
So you're
a policy area that you know nothing about, and yet you have to
100%.
learn about it, scope out what the issue is,
100%.
scope out all the things that are contributing to the issue, and then think about a plan.
Yep. So I think when it comes to consulting as well, that you're not independent in doing it. So you will have a team that are specialists in that area, but you should be able to ascertain what are the key lines.
Okay.
And usually the teams will have it, but they don't have the scope or capacity to deliver it, or they don't have the project management skills to do so. So you're, as a generalist or as a consultant, you go and you consult them. This is how you can do it, and this is the most efficient way. So consulting is more about efficiency as well. The most efficient way to do it, and then you solve that problem, and then you move to the next one.
I see. And in terms of applying to get this particular job role, how do you prepare for that? And what would kind of make a company want to take you as a consultant?
I think it's just really demonstrating those skills in terms of project management, organization skills, team building skills, because the crux of it is, if you're going to a consulting kind of area, you have to know how to work with people, because you need to elicit work from people.
Yeah.
So if you know how to do that, and you can show that you have great stakeholder management, and you're a strategic thinker, those two things are quite fundamental in terms of when it comes to consulting. But I think there's a lot of graduate roles when it comes to consulting. Obviously, initially the kind of expectations wouldn't be that much, but as you grow into your career, you'll have more responsibilities, and the expectation will be more. So you'll have more clientele, you'll have a certain budget that you have to maintain.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could be that there's a department that has a budget and they need to deliver a KPI, and they can't deliver that. So you have to come and rearrange everything and say, this is how you can solve the problem within this budget. So
it's a lot of like quality improvement in a way as well.
Yeah, so efficiency, quality improvement, and it's about output. The fundamental thing is output. So it just made me think about how you were saying about it's difficult to kind of navigate different areas, and I just thought some sectors you can do this, so long as you have the transferable skills to do so.
Yeah, no, 100%. I feel like to a certain degree, yes.
But you become a generalist, and I think that for me was something that I didn't want to continue doing. And some people like that fact that it's changing all the time. You evolve and you're doing new things all the time.
What didn't you like about it?
I think it's because once I understand the crux of a matter or the policy area, I had to leave to a different area. And then
and did you feel like there was a lot more you could still do in that area?
There's so much more, or there's so much I wanted to learn, or bolster my understanding in. And I wanted to become a subject specialist in this area, but unfortunately I had to pivot. And so when I found areas that I really enjoy, I couldn't continue in that because I was expected to go solve another problem.
I see. Is there no way that people can have that role but just be kind of specialist in that area?
So when it comes to consulting, you typically it depends what kind of area of work you're doing. So the work I was doing, because it was more policy focused, it was 3 months, 4 months. Sometimes consulting can be 6 months project. It really varies. But if that problem is persisting and they still require people, it's budget as well. If they require people, then you can put a request in. I want to stay a bit longer. So it really depends what area of work you're doing and the budget and the need.
Yeah. Fine. That's very interesting, because I feel like in this day and age there's loads of people who are interested in consulting, or that's a realistic career path for them, but actually not many people know exactly what consultants do, and it seems like quite a myth from an outside
it's
world.
not really defined.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So it's problem solving at its best, essentially.
100%.
Interesting.
You have to be very agile, and you have to be very resilient, I think, when it comes to consulting, because you're tasked with so many different stakeholders, and I think the stakeholder management is one of the key things, because you're brand new to your team, like you said, right? You're just been deployed into this team, and now you have to understand people's ways of working. People undermine this very much. You need to understand how people work. You can't enforce or impose your way of working as you come into the team, because you're not going to get the best output.
100%.
So you really have to be a people's person to be able to be a successful consultant, and you have to be very strategic as well.
Very interesting. Well, I hope that for our listeners out there who may have been confused like myself, I hope that cleared that up. Thank you for that explanation. But yeah, I guess that does kind of bring us to the end of the first half of our show. Our next half is going to be talking more about kind of our 20s and how we've grown and progressed. And we touched on it a little bit in this half. But yeah, Any last words before we go into the break, Mariam?
I just try new things.
Try new things.
Just try new things, and if you don't like it, you can change. It's okay.
I love that. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, because I feel like there's a lot of kind of, you have to stick to what you've decided, and commitment. And commitment is a big thing, and it's a really important skill. But I think it also, when there's something that your heart isn't in it, or you don't want to pursue it. And I feel like at that point it's okay to be like, there's something I don't like, and I'm going to move on to something that I do like.
There's so many people that I know in medicine that moved to tech, so
are you trying to recruit me, Mariam?
I don't work in tech, but I just think like it's quite sad that there's this imposed trajectory on people.
I feel like it's changing, and I feel like it depends on the people themselves whether they want to stick to that or not. But yeah, that brings us to the end of our first half. So please do join us in the next half, where we'll be talking about our 20s and kind of where we see ourselves going from here. So yeah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.